Chapter 16. That Saturday turned out to be the day when winter descended abruptly, and with rare vengeance. Remember, we're only talking mid-December. Still a dozen full shopping days till you know what, but it could have been the depths of January. After things kicked off with what seemed a foot of snow around 3, the elements really started to unload. Everything from sleet in historic proportions to a wind chill that would have frosted the horns off a Bixar County billy goat. While I waited for Tam, I battened down the garden, covered the outdoor furniture, and prudently provisioned the larder with a flagon of Ramai antifreeze. Ben, in the meantime, was lumbering around downstairs, eyeing the snow-covered garden with an air of disgruntlement. The universe had turned unacceptable, something he never greeted with equanimity. I decided to try and divert his misery by hauling him up on the long country French dining table and combing some of the knots out of his shag. When that merely reinforced his overall gloom, however, I called it quits, located a consoling rawhide stick for him to gnaw, and poured a brandy. It was along about then, shortly after nightfall, that Tam finally appeared. A cab with snow chains dropped her off. She'd come directly from the office, which Noda had just shut down for the weekend, and I helped her navigate the sleet-covered steps. I got the immediate sense that her first impression of my living quarters was unchanged from the old days. In spite of all the art, armor, and antiques, the place had a poignant rootlessness about it. Boys like toys. They just get more expensive as the bank account grows. Also, since she'd been in the man game long enough to spot a divorce-rebound case a mile off, she probably had me figured from the start. Part of that army of emotional paraplegics in our feckless day and age. After the meaty twist, however, I suppose she was ready to consult with somebody concerning the direction things were headed. I warmly invited her downstairs to the sisal-carpeted den just off the garden and dumped some logs in the fireplace. Next, I pulled out a few discs Mendelssohn seemed about right for some reason and offered to whip up a batch of margaritas. 'Twould be, I dared to hope, a long winter's eve. Alas, she said no thanks. A club soda and lime would do fine. Looked as if I would be working barehanded, without aid of that universal socializer, distilled spirit, so I rustled up a Perrier, then poured another snifter of brandy for myself. Since she appeared exhausted, my first suggestion was she kick off her shoes and get comfortable. No argument. After settling in, shoes off and feet to the fire, she announced she was ready to hear what I'd come up with. Before an awkward silence could grow, I snapped open my briefcase. Dr. Richardson, in keeping with the ground rule that this is a formal business meeting, let me introduce my first agenda item. I flashed her my best smile, then pulled out the purloined page. This is part of the paperwork Maury seems to have brought with her. I don't understand too well what it's all about. But my first impression is that somebody has decided to do some major tinkering with your program. Take a look at this and give me an opinion. I passed it over. She glanced down, then back at me. Are you supposed to be bringing DNI documents home? That was her first reaction, swear to God. Look, this just accidentally got in with some of my photocopies. All it is a list of companies, and I didn't want to talk about it there in the office. I reached over and ran my finger down the string of firms, then to several columns of numbers off to the right. The question is, what are these outfits suddenly doing on DNI buy list? She studied it a second, looked around the room, and said exactly nothing. Doesn't that seem at all strange to you? I finally spoke up. As I understand the plan, you want to shift more corporate funding into research in the companies you're buying into. I do have it right, don't I? She nodded. Okay, then you're with me so far. But take a look at this. I indicated the column of numbers. That's the current research budget for these firms. It says so right up there on the top. Presumably, These figures came out of the analytical setup down on 11. Does anything about those figures seem out of line? She looked at it, her eyes widening, then narrowing. Well, I don't know what this sheet is all about. She glanced up. These companies aren't part of our buys. Got news for you. I think they just made the team. I pointed to the heading. See that acquisition schedule, revisions. When she said nothing, Noda, I continued. But you're right, they weren't on the original list. The reason being, I would surmise, that they didn't need any of this so-called management RX you guys are supposed to be cooking up. Look at that one and that one. Even I know enough to realize those outfits are operating with a real cash surplus right now, have plenty of R&D funding already, and hence are doing just fine, thank you. The figures, in fact, are right over there in that column on the right. Matt, we don't know what this is for. True, so let's just play pretend. And to make it fun, let me show you something else. I rummaged through my briefcase some more, finally extracting another paper. I copied a corresponding page from the file on current buys. I laid it alongside the first. She picked up the second sheet, checked it over. I helped compile this list. Then maybe you'll see what I'm saying. Format's the same. The only difference is, some of the dogs have been dropped and replaced by some very well-run corporations. You're right about that. All high-tech, heavy research investment. Progress, the first scale to fall from her eyes. Then let's play another round of this pretend game. As I understand it, you and yours put together this original list of companies for one main reason: lousy management. But all of a sudden the outfits in the worst shape on list number 1 have disappeared on list number 2. Meaning, I would assume, that they're no longer part of the program, at least as it's laid out on this revised version Mori must have brought in from Tokyo. What are you trying to say? For Chris' sake, what did she think I was trying to say? Oh, nothing much, I suppose, except that it looks to me like somebody's just knifed your program in the back. All of a sudden D&I going to start buying outfits that already have good management, not to mention heavy research commitments. So what exactly is anybody supposed to be doing to help them along? I paused. Maybe a better question is, who removed those others, the ones now winging it on a hope and a prayer? She laid down the 2 pages side by side and began to compare them in more detail, a finger here, a finger there. But strictly no comment. Along about then, Ben got up and checked out the sleet-covered garden, then lumbered back and plopped down beside us, clearly expecting a pat for diligence in the line of duty. She remarked that English sheepdogs always reminded her of a big flataki rug. After that put down, she returned to the lists. I hoped the poor guy's sensitive ego wasn't mortally fractured. Well, she announced finally, my so-called discovery didn't add up to much. Matt, I officially have no opinion about this. It could mean anything. She shrugged. Maybe the new twist is to start with the companies that can benefit the most from coordination. Take on the easy job first, where the payoff will be greatest. Save the tough ones for later. Oh, sure, who knows? It could all be very innocent, right? I mean, for all we can tell, the moon might really be green cheese. I wondered what had gotten into her all of a sudden. It was plain as day what was happening. But instead of congratulating me on my sleuthing, she was turning obtuse. Tell me exactly how you got this sheet. Like I said, more or less by accident. I told her the story again. I was about to chuck it, then I took a second to mull it over. That's when I got to wondering why the numbers seemed so inconsistent. Next thing I noticed was the new list of players. All of a sudden the heavens opened. A vision. I got up to freshen my brandy, then came back. She was still sitting there, maybe too exhausted to think straight. But I take it you don't believe my little epiphany means anything. Since I don't know what it means, I'm not going to engage in a lot of uninformed speculation. Good Christ, I thought. What's happened to all her reputed brilliance? You know, she went on, I don't think you should be taking any more documents out of the office. There's a reason for all the security. Hey, back off. I just have boundless curiosity. I still couldn't fathom her lack of interest. No, make that hostility. Look, I don't claim to understand how birds fly, how fish swim, or how this whole damned picture fits together. However, my new, albeit uninformed, observation is that Noda and company are not exactly giving us the fine print on their scenario. Exhibit A, this strange new list. I think some fresh air would be nice. She rose to her feet, located her shoes, and strolled over to look out at the garden. The sleet and snow was about 1.5 feet deep. Why don't we go into the back? What? I stumbled to my feet. Do you have any idea? She looked at me a bit funny, then made some hand signals. Finally, I realized she was telling me. She didn't want to say anything more inside the house. Talk about paranoid. Suddenly the reason for all her hemming and hawing over my little theft came clear. She actually thought we might be bugged. Get serious, lady. Anyway, she gave me the cool it sign, then calmly started putting on her coat. Astounded by the possible dimensions of human mistrust, I dug out a sweater from behind the couch and opened the door. She was still nursing that damned designer water. Ben snapped to alertness and galloped to the door, whereupon he confronted the weather. His strategic decision, executed with lightning speed, was to switch into his patented zone defense surveillance mode against backyard trespassers, which required staying inside where it was warm. I gave him a pat, freshened his water bowl, and followed her out into the snow. There was a brief lull in the weather. The sky glowed red from all the streetlights, at least what you could see of it through the surrounding brownstones and the leafless ailanthus tree at the back. I looked around as Ben gave the fence one last survey, then plopped down and settled his chin onto his paws with a grunt. Tam, I suppose, had finally concluded I wasn't pulling some kind of loyalty check for Noda. So that was when she opened the real can of worms. How long was she making copies? I mean, you were standing right behind her. Maury, I don't know, less than a minute. I examined her a trifle puzzled. Why? How many pages? Probably 6 or so. She just stood there a moment, gazing up at the sky. Then she went back inside, stepping around Ben, and returned with the sheet. Did you notice this? She pointed to the upper right-hand corner. I took it and strained in the faint light from the back windows. It says 129/147. I looked up. You think that means? I think your episode suggests at least 2 things. She took back the page. The first one is, this is part of a much larger document. With you so far, 147 pages, and the second. You said she only made 6 copies, then overlooked this. She paused. Don't you think Akira Mori can count? At that moment, the snowy night grew silent as a tomb. What are you suggesting? I finally blurted it out. That she left this on purpose. Maybe, but I don't have the slightest idea why. Christ, you have a very mistrusting mind. I slogged on through the snow for a few steps, then turned back. I'm convinced it was accidental. All right, let's just say that's a possibility for now. But what we do know for sure is we'd better get our hands on the rest of this. Hey, don't look at me. I'm already in this scam deeper than I ever intended to be. I say we either play their way or cut and run. We start getting too nosy, and we could end up on the wrong end of one of those Uzis. Matt, there's something else I noticed about the list. It's ominous. Care to elaborate? I kicked at the snow. Well, not out here. I'm freezing. She pulled her coat a bit tighter. Is there someplace inside where we can talk? I've got an idea, but let's warm up first. I led the way back in. The fire had died a bit, so she settled on the floor next to the hearth, the smooth contours of her cheeks golden in the flickering light. Sure you won't have a brandy after all? To combat the chill. The Quartet Opus 44, number 1, was enveloping us, both violins emerging out of the shadows. She looked up and smiled. Maybe it would be nice. I fetched it, slid onto the floor next to her, and stretched to stir the coals. Ben sauntered over to keep me honest, plunked down, and was immediately out like a light. How are we doing for warmth? I propped the poker against the side of the mantel, then reached over and touched her tangled hair lightly with my fingertips. To my everlasting surprise, she leaned next to me. Much better. Maybe we should both bail out right now. Tonight. Why not just go down to my place in the islands and monitor the apocalypse off the satellite dish? Watch Meaty eat America. Was I joking? Only partially. Down home we have a saying about folks with a certain je ne sais quoi they do to ride the river with. In my book, Tam was definitely one of the riders. The fire snapped and startled Ben, who glanced up, checked out the sleet-covered garden, then grimly resumed his snooze. She reached over and gave him a pat. The first time. You know, I can't believe Meaty is behind all this. I know at least one Meaty person myself. You know somebody in Meaty. I was a trifle taken aback. Who? She stared at the fire. His name is Kenji Asano. You wouldn't have heard of him. I lay there for a moment listening to the quartet, my memory registers running a quick sort. Then it came to me. Kenji Asano was the meaty guy Henderson said had masterminded Japan's rape of the U.S. semiconductor industry. You actually know him. Sure do, she smiled. Very well. Shit, I didn't really need to hear this. That sounds like a little more than a professional acquaintance. I looked at her for confirmation. A little. Okay, I thought. Guess we're getting down to the straight story here. Press on. Well, I have some news you may not like. This Asano genius personally engineered the destruction of the U.S. industry in RAM chips. Probably the most devastating sneak attack on America since Pearl Harbor. She stiffened. Who told you that? Let's just say I heard it. So what's this guy doing all of a sudden saving U.S. high-tech industry? He's already cost this country tens of thousands of jobs and literally billions of dollars. I don't believe it. I know Ken. Sure, he works for Meaty, but his job is overseeing Japan's own research in supercomputers. He's very proud of their progress. Oops, I swirled my snifter. Whatever you say, if that's really true, then excuse me. I take it all back. She looked up probably, not believing my diplomatic reversal, and watched as I casually slipped my arm around her waist. I couldn't tell if she wanted it to happen or not. Thinking I might have some momentum going, I reached back and pulled a couple of wide cushions off the couch, stationed them by the fire, then eased us both against them. I tried to do it with naturalness, finesse. It wasn't happening. Matthew, underneath all that unnecessary bluster, which is just as I remember, you're still a half-decent guy, which I also remember. But I don't really think this is a good idea. She looked at me, her face highlighted in the orange glow of the embers. I hope it's not because you have other commitments. I heard my voice harden, like maybe in Japan. I'm just a little distracted tonight, that's all. She watched as I trailed a finger around the hard tip of a nipple beneath her shirt. Gently, she moved my hand away. Don't start. Maybe I can at least get a rain check. I retired from the field. Possibly. She smiled, then gave me a telling glance. A while ago you said something about another place. My soundproof chamber. Right, I rose. We're always open around here for travelers on a frosty night. I helped her up. And for this evening's special introductory offer, there's a hot tub down the hall. Why don't you let me fill it, and you can unwind those muscles for a while, Japanese style or California style, or whatever. Do you good? She looked me over a second, then smiled. Lots of nice, loud running water. Exactly. Off we went to the Italian marble bathroom, there off the downstairs bedroom. I'd installed that little indulgence for Joanna back during happier times. These days, I used it as the world's largest laundry hamper. Ripping it out would have cost a fortune. Joe's Revenge, I called the thing. She marched in, took a look about the room, which had one of those big tubs trimmed in redwood, and said it reminded her of a place near Eyes. She did at least have the discretion to omit the circumstances of that occasion. What happened next sort of shook my cool, my being a good Texas lapsed Baptist. You see, I'd never bought into the nudity is wholesome ethic of the age of Aquarius. Passed me right by. I mean, where's the fun in life without a little forbidden fruit? But Tam just began shucking her clothes. Everything. Kept going till she'd even doffed her little beige knickers, piling everything one piece at a time in a neat heap on the counter. Just like that. While bold corporate raider Matt Walton stood there in terminal astonishment, grasping the edge of the sink as if it were a life preserver. My nonchalance was an Oscar-winning performance. Now, in the attire God gave her, she calmly inquired if I had any bubble bath. Well, sure, I suppose so. Probably somewhere around here. If not, there's probably a box of Tide in the basement. I groped blindly in the cabinet, and my hand fell upon a pink bottle whose label read, Mr. Bubble. What's this? Then I realized it must be some suds stashed there by Amy. Bet she saw somebody soaking on TV and concluded that's the way grown-up women behaved. My God, it's in their genes. Then I turned around. Tell you one thing, Dr. Tamara Richardson was still in great shape, all of her. Was she pulling a tease number on me, or just doing what comes naturally? Sad to say, I fear it was the latter. I guess she'd somehow internalized this Japanese idea that nudity is no big deal. Tam, I finally found my voice. You're something else. I know you're smart, and I'm beginning to remember you never were all that retiring. How about refreshing me on a few of the other things I seem to have forgot? I think I wanted to be a boy, she laughed as she sampled the water with her toe. I thought they had all the fun. Now she was pouring in a test portion of Amy's Mr. Bubble. Then I found out girls could do anything boys could, but usually better, so I stopped worrying about it. She stepped in. Easy, you're talking to an unreconstructed male chauvinist. What else is new? You all are at heart. At least you have the decency to admit it. She dumped in the remainder of the pink gunk. Will somebody please tell me why women, all women, go for that stuff? An exaggeration, you say. Ever see one turn it down? Hey, I'm trying to deprogram myself, but it's uphill work. I watched as a perfectly formed breast disappeared beneath the foam. I tend to be old-fashioned. I recall all too well. Well, give me a chance. I leaned back against the sink. You know, this striptease isn't helping repress my primal male instincts a whole heck of a lot. Matt, for somebody who's supposed to be an expert on Japan, you've understood very little about us. Us? You know, I'm half and half. She flashed me a Mona Lisa smile as she was wrapping her hair in a towel. I found myself thinking that at least she shaves her underarms, a minor concession to conventional propriety. Well, so what? I'm an equal opportunity seductionist. That is, when I get the opportunity. Not making much headway tonight, I fear. Another tricky smile. She was starting to drive me distracted. Thought you'd never notice. Matt, you're an emotional basket case. I've seen plenty. She looked me over sympathetically. Sorry, but I've got enough problems of my very own. You'll have to manage your own salvation. Could be you're just deceived by my sensitive nature. I leaned against the counter, playing peekaboo with a tan nipple, now half concealed in the bubbles, mistaking it for brain damage. She shook her head in the negative. I read your gender pretty well. I was beginning to get a little annoyed. Who needed this? Tell you what, Dr. Richardson, for all my putative failings, I do happen to possess a modest allotment of native wit. And my male intuition tells me your dance card is full right now. That same right brain perception also suggests it has something to do with this MLTL Honcho Asano. So that upsets me for a couple of reasons, only one of which will probably be of any interest to you. I don't think you have an entirely open mind on the possibility Meaty, or somebody, may be about to try and nail this country to the wall. Because if you admitted that, you would also have to admit something you apparently find distasteful to concede about your Prince Charming. I watched her eyes grow sad. Stop me if I cross the line from preaching to meddling, to use a little expression from my youth. Matthew, you've just ceased being nice. She looked down. What do you do if you think you trust somebody, and then you find out maybe that trust is misplaced? Old Ecclesiasticus, back in Bible times, told us, in the time of adversity, consider. As advice goes, that's still probably sound value for the dollar. Like, for example, you might want to back off and do a little thinking on whether Noda and his crowd have been using you, and me for that matter, like a couple of patsies. When she said nothing, I pressed on. I walk into the office yesterday. The first thing I hear about is some meaty connection. Then tonight I hear about your meaty connection, and it's starting to sound like the same tune. Like maybe these guys have been playing you like a violin. But why me? Credibility and low profile for Meaty's grab. By sending you out to meet the victims, they've thrown the hounds off the scent. Dr. Save American Industry has come to help. You're so goddamn clean, Tam. Impeccable credentials. You're gold to those guys. I was set to give her a blast, but I decided to try keeping the lid on for once. Maybe a better question than why they chose you is why you went for it. How did they brainwash you? Nobody brainwashed me. I still think Noda's being straight. He can think in global terms. That's a rarity. And how about this Asano character? You sure gave me the message to back off when I questioned his intentions. Maybe I've been thinking with something besides my head. She sighed and leaned back. But then, maybe not. I have no reason to believe he'd mislead me. Look, I don't know anything about the situation, but I respectfully suggest you ought to reflect on that possibility. I looked at her. By the way, I seem to remember you said there was something else about the list that struck you as odd. It has to do with the kind of research being done by those new firms on the list. A pattern, she paused. What pattern? I'd rather not say just yet, until I'm sure. It's probably just my imagination. Something snapped inside me about then. Anger. Tam Richardson, I was rapidly concluding, was being used by those bastards. And as best I could tell, this idealistic woman couldn't let herself believe it. The situation royally pissed me off, even more when I also suspected this Asano operator had somehow been playing fast and loose with her heartstrings. I decided then, and there, I wasn't going to let them get away with it. A strange psychology takes hold of you when you sense you've been temporarily outflanked. I think it's that primal human response somebody once dubbed flight or fight. You realize you've got two choices. You can either stand your ground, or you can make a run for the sidelines. So what to do about Dai Nippon and Noda and Mori and Asano? Right then and there, I made a tactical decision. I decided that, like the caveman facing the saber-toothed tiger, the best defense would be to try and make the beast back off. More to the point, It wasn't merely Tam that was imperiled. Maybe Henderson's suspicions were right. Maybe this was the handshake that turned into a karate flip, the beginning of World War Roman II, Part B. So I figured I owed it to myself and everybody else to at least uncover the truth. No entity, I've always believed, is unstoppable, no matter how massive. There's always a soft underbelly somewhere. After a while, any big organization gets cocky and makes a blunder. Sometimes, in fact, you can lure them into it. I concluded there was only one way to go, head-to-head with Dai Nippon. You want peaches, you shake the tree. Okay, you've got your theories, I've got mine. But for both our sakes, I think it's time we moved on them. What do you mean? She looked up. I suggest we start with a little information gathering. I turned on the hot water again, nice and noisy, then continued. What do you say we go up and take a little private look around the offices? Tonight? What better time? Weather alert, right? Nobody's there, it's perfect. We can fast talk the security, get in, and check the place over. And where exactly do you propose we look? She examined me skeptically. I'm there every day. How about that new office Maury commandeered for herself? I think we ought to poke around and see what she's got. Maybe try and locate the rest of that document, if nothing else. I'm not sure we ought to be doing anything quite that drastic, at least not just yet. I didn't claim it was approved by Amy Vanderbilt. I just say we ought to give it a shot. If we don't look into this, who will? Maybe we'll find something to explain the so-called pattern you think you see. Matt, for all I know, that may be nothing more than a coincidence. If Noda found out we'd done something like this, the whole ball game would be over. That's the chance we take. Let's just see what we can come up with, okay? Personally, I'm beginning to think Noda and your pal Asano are both world-class con artists. I poured a little more cognac for us both. But whoever's right, we should at least try to find out. Who knows? What if it's becoming a meaty show now, for some purpose neither of us can imagine? All right. She looked apprehensive for a second, only a second, and then her eyes hardened. You know, Noda and Mori claim I'm Fujiwara, on my mother's side, naturally. She laughed. And you know something else. I feel in my bones that it's true. I believe it. I'm Japanese, Matthew, and I'm proud of that. I glanced over at a set of samurai armor stationed just outside the bathroom door, glistening enameled steel. Tell you the truth, I'm second to nobody when it comes to admiring Japan's ethic and their guts. But I tend to draw the line at master race talk. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't object too strenuously if they did manage to beat us in a fair contest. Hell, we won round 1, and they were remarkably sporting about it. But what I want is to make sure round 2 is fought on level ground. No inventing new rules, no rabbit punches, or below-the-belt stuff. That's all I ask. How about showing me some of those swords you claim you collect? She came out with it, just like that. My pleasure, like nothing better. Besides, it seemed a good time for a change of pace. I straightened up and headed for the back parlor upstairs, then around the corner to the sword room, its door now fully repaired from the strange break-in. I fished out the key and snapped open the lock. Funny thing, but walking around fully dressed Slash had started feeling out of place. Maybe it is merely a state of mind. All right now, where to start? This was a crucial moment. My first impulse was to go all the way to gold, that marvelous katana dating from the early Kamakura, or even before, said to have come from the forge of the Shogun Yoritomo Minamoto's personal swordsmith. But wait a minute. After that, what? Maybe the absolute top should be saved for a more auspicious moment. That sword was, to my mind, an almost sacred work. Maybe instead we ought to start with something a little offbeat, then gradually work up to the best and sharpest. The obvious choice, in fact, was a piece I considered a real curiosity, racked there on the left top slot. As I lifted it off and slipped it out of its scabbard, the metal glistened like a mirror, reminding me how long it's been since I'd oiled and pampered my playthings. I'm afraid nothing here was handed down by the sun goddess. I was coming back down the stairs a little unsteadily, like a half-drunk samurai. But this one's kind of like the old style, at least the metallurgy is. Unusual, heavy on copper and tin, in a way almost closer to bronze than steel. Then I proceeded to point out a few interesting features: the nice curve of the face line, the burl grain, the Shinto deities on the elliptical tsuba handguard, that kind of thing, taking care to keep it out of the damned bubbles. I was starting to get wound up, as all enthusiasts do with a captive audience, when she tactfully cut me off. How's the handle attached, or the grip, or whatever it's called? That's the hilt, the tsuka, held on with a little wooden peg stuck through a hole in the metal. Here, let me show you. I had a small brass punch on my key ring that was specially designed to push it out. Under the grip, there's a wrapping of silk braid, and then a layer of the belly skin of a stingray to protect the steel. But you just remove this peg, and the whole ensemble slides right off. I removed the handle and laid it on the sink. Now you can see the untempered end of the sword, the tang or nakego as it's called. I passed the weapon to her, blunt end first. That's where a swordsmith engraved his signature, his title, the place it was forged, so you always should check. On a really important piece. There may be cutting tests noted there. Like maybe they tried out the blade on a criminal or two just to see if it worked. Quality control. God, she shuddered, really. Licensed testers did it and certified it in gold engraving on the nakego. Some of the ones upstairs have it, but this one's an ubu, virgin. I watched her turn it in the dim light. Careful now, that edge is very sharp. How can you tell if it's really old? Lots of ways. The grain, the signature, and then too a good one should have some rust there on the nakego, black not red. She held it up a second and examined it. Virgin, huh? No signature. She had a funny, almost embarrassed expression on her face. Correct, but like I said, this one's not. Then who was Nihon Steelworks? Nagoya. Somebody you bought it from. Anybody ever tell you you've got a crummy sense of humor? I wasn't smiling as I reached to take it back. Her crack annoyed me, and I'm afraid I showed it. Some things you don't kid around about. That's a modern foundry that turns out crappy. Don't get testy. I'm only reading. Right there. She pointed to some very faint English engraved into the metal. Christ. I grabbed it back and held it under the light to look. No mistaking. There it was, plain as could be. That's when I finally realized the thing was a copy. A goddamn replica of the original. Okay, a remarkably good one, but a fake nonetheless. How did this get in my closet? Could somebody have broken in and... Suddenly it hit me. The robbery. Whoever had lifted my records must have also pulled a switcheroo on this katana, leaving this piece of Nagoya junk and disguising the deed by replacing the original grip and tsuba handguard. I'd been too loaded to notice. I wanted to crack the goddamn fraud over my knee like in the movies, but you don't do that with a samurai sword, even a phony modern one. So instead, I flung it down on Joe's Italian marble floor and headed back upstairs to check the others. What in hell had happened? Had they cleaned me out after all? My God, thousands. I began yanking down swords, starting with the aforementioned centerpiece of the collection, scrutinizing them in the light. But after about half a dozen proved to be all right, I started calming down. Nothing else seemed to have been touched. Well, what the heck, I thought. It wasn't exactly a crippling loss. Finally, I grew a little ashamed of myself and sheepishly wandered back down, collecting the ringer off the floor. Tam, I'm sorry. Somebody broke in a while back, and they must have stuck this fraud in my collection. It's not the one I thought it was. Sure, she just looked at me with some sympathy. Matthew, it's all right, really. Lots of people own replicas of art. I have a few prints myself. It's not a crime. She touched my hand. Don't worry, it doesn't matter. I bit my tongue to squelch the unpleasant word forming on my lips, stomped back upstairs, and returned with a real sword. Then I gave my lecture all over again, dwelling on every insignificant detail. I was going to bore the woman till she cried uncle. Finally, I succeeded. Okay, you win. I apologize. She leaned back in the bubbles. You really love this hardware, don't you? Tam, I love the samurai ideals. I admire craftsmanship. I revere courage. The guys who made and used these blades had it all. If I'm going to collect art, why not something that inspires me? She just looked at me and nodded. I think she really understood. Then let's make a pact, Matt, you and me. She finally spoke up. We'll face Dai Nippon or Meaty or whomever honorably, and we'll keep them honest. Samurai, I smiled. Lineage to lineage, and may the best person win. I returned the sword and locked up, then lounged in the bedroom and chatted through the open door while she finished her soak. It didn't seem proper to lug a chair into the bath, and there was something too undignified about perching atop the loo. Why, I kept wondering, had somebody taken such elaborate pains to lift a single antique and plant a fake, so I wouldn't miss it? But why bother? Finally, she got into a robe and came out, whereupon we went downstairs and proceeded to put away more brandy, sleet slamming against the windows. That was when she refreshed my recollections of her early life, the peripatetic half-breed army brat. I think, truth be told, she was currently about as adrift as I was. She was too wary to admit it. I was too incapable of touching my own fractured emotions. So we talked around things, saying everything except that maybe we needed somebody. All the while, the storm outside continued to rage. But once again, I was feeling those stirrings that I'd kept on ice for way too long. Alas, though, it had to end. About 1 a.m. we geared up. She retrieved her coat, I banked the fire, and we straggled out into the sleet. After finally managing a cab, we headed uptown. We'd agreed on the rules. Now we were off to face the beast. Chapter 17. As we rode, I tried to get into mental fighting trim. It wasn't easy. Walton, I kept telling myself, you're too old for this kind of intrigue. And why drag this innocent woman in? You're not shuffling paper and cutting deals, and then going out for a drink with the other side's counsel after you've both finished impressing your clients by shoving each other against the wall. You're about to start fooling around with guys who carry submachine guns when you wouldn't know what to do with an Uzi if somebody handed you one. If these boys start shooting, there won't be a lot of polite inquiries concerning due process. Tam was leaning against my shoulder, still perfumed from the bubble bath, and totally relaxed. She seemed to know what she was doing, or maybe she didn't want to think about the risk we were taking. As for me, this Sam Spade number was definitely not part of my legal arsenal. My thoughts, however, kept coming back to her. Tam Richardson was the first woman I'd felt this comfortable with for a long, long time. She was a mixture of tough and soft, and she was smart. What I'd always been looking for. Exit Donna, Enter Tam. Maybe life was going to give me another inning. If we both lived that long. We'd headed uptown on 6th Avenue, rutted with slush. At 14th Street, we hung a right east toward 3rd. The snowplows were out, together with the salt machines, while abandoned cars were lodged in furrows of ice all along the curb. This was definitely shaping up as the storm of the year. Since most of Tanaka's staff lived in the Japanese ghetto up in Hartsdale and Eastchester, where there's even a Japanese PTA these days. They surely must have caught the Orient Express out of Grand Central before the trains got stopped dead by the weather. Certainly tonight of all nights, the DNI offices would be empty. This had to be our shot. So shape up, Walton, and go for it. While we listened to the sleet bounce off the back window, our Jamaican driver proceeded to compare New York City unfavorably with every armpit he'd ever known, as well as a few Arctic locales he doubtless was acquainted with only by reputation. I finally tuned him out and began asking myself one question over and over. What exactly are we going to do if we figure out there's some kind of skullduggery afoot? Is there any way to stop them, even if we wanted to? Probably nothing short of Congress's cracking down could keep Noda's money out of the country, and who's going to support that kind of legislation? Most salons, in fact, were hailing DNI and its Japanese billions as the salvation of America. No lawmaker was staring at the cameras and viewing with concern this new godsend of cash. Ditto the stock exchange. They were nervous downtown, sure. But given the avowed purpose of Wall Street attracting money, there wasn't exactly a groundswell of sentiment against Dai Nippon's massive investments. Noda had come into the market at its darkest moment and begun shoveling in capital. How could this be anything but positive? So every time another Japanese billion rolled in and prices ticked up some more, everybody merely leapt for joy. The Japanese were coming to rejuvenate our land, cheered the journal. Billions from the cash-rich Japanese capital markets were voting with their feet to be part of America's resurgence. Maybe they're right, I told myself. About the only discordant voices in this chorus of hesitant hallelujahs belonged to a few op-ed sour grape academics. I recalled one piece in particular from late last week. Who was it? Robert Reich, Lester Thurow, Adam Smith. This must be how it felt all those years in Europe as they helplessly watched the invasion of American money. Has the U.S. now joined the Third World, capitalized by rich Yankees from the East? Now at last we realize that setting up plants here for co-production was merely the foot in the door. Does it matter if U.S. industry is owned by American pension funds or Japanese insurance companies? Guess not, unless you happen to care whether we still control our own destiny. America, soon to be the wholly owned subsidiary. The writer was just blowing smoke and knew it. These days, a harangue in the Times and a token will get you on the subway. Even Henderson was taking a new look at Noda, astounded by his market savvy. The Georgia Poe boy who once summarized his own trading style as the 4 F quotes, find em, fleece em, fuck em, and forget em, had met his match. What a play Noda had made. To Bill, my new client had acquired the aura of some omnipotent invader from the depths of space, the creature that ate Wall Street. His eyes glazed over whenever he reflected on Noda's masterful 1-2 punch. Billions skimmed inside a week. Tam, take a good, long look. I was pointing up into the night as we emerged onto the slippery sidewalk. The house that Noda built. Did all of this happen since only late September? Time flies when you're having fun. She slammed the door and headed for the lobby, calm as could be. Okay, Walton, you'd better toughen up too. I rewarded our grumbling cabbie with a vulgar tip and watched the vehicle slowly roll off into the sleet, tires crunching. To end another of those passing New York intimacies, so vivid yet so forgettable. As it turned out, lobby security was a breeze, since yours truly had approved the application of the night guard personally right after DNI took over. Eddie Matsuo, blue uniform and grasping a styrofoam cup of coffee, glanced up from the Sunday Daily News, his face generic Staten Island. "What brings you out on a night like this, Mr. Walton? Nothing wrong, I hope. Do me a favor, Eddie. Burn this place down. We'll split the insurance and both retire to Miami Beach. Who needs New York?" He concurred the idea had merit. I then went on to mention that we'd just come from uptown. Dr. Richardson here had forgotten some kind of gobbledygook up on 12, and we wouldn't be a minute. "Tell you the truth, Eddie, my fingers are too damned numb to bother signing the visitor's book." He saluted and returned his concentration to the Knicks' perennial slump. We took the night elevator up, and somewhere around the time we passed the 9th floor, we managed to settle on a story. Noda, we would say, had called Tam and asked her to hurry up a special report on one of the firms for Monday. We just left a dinner party on the east side, thought we'd drop by and pick up some printouts since she wanted to work at home tomorrow. Shouldn't be more than a minute. As the number above the door hit 12, I tried to remember how to pray. In the hallway, we waved at the TV eye and the steel door opened. Standing there was Shiro Yamada, cropped hair, trifle burly, gray uniform, one of the regulars. He shifted his Uzi as we came through. Then he recognized Tam and bowed low. By the wildest of good fortune, Yamada only spoke Japanese, a linguistic limitation that turned out to be crucial. Tam began by observing the niceties. She commiserated with him about the weather, the late hour, would the next shift be able to get through and relieve him. He was all bows and deference, and hi. Finally, she worked around to why we were there, almost as though that were a nuisance, and the real reason had been to drop by for a chat. By the way, she added, there were a couple of things she needed from her office. She gave him the story. Yamada listened, bowing, hi, then sucked in his breath to demonstrate we'd presented him with a serious conflict of obligations, which for a Japanese is the most disturbing prospect imaginable. "This situation entails great difficulty," he said, drawing in more air through his front teeth. "Honto nai musukashii desu." "Musukashii desu ka?" inquired Tam, difficulty. "Hi, so desu." Yes, and he was deeply apologetic. Lots of sumimasen, very sorry. At first I thought he just hadn't bought the story. But then it turned out that there were these rules, you see. No one was allowed on the floor weekends without a pass signed personally by Tanaka-san. He glanced at his watch. It was nearly 2 a.m., more heavy intakes of air and musukashis. Of course, the Honorable Dr. Richardson-san, being an honorable director herself, should be able to come and go as she pleased, but the rules. He seemed to be pleading with Tarn to help him find a resolution for this towering dilemma. "What's the problem, Tam?" I inquired sotto voce. "No fucking pass." After an extremely awkward pause, a light bulb clicked on in my simple mind. With great theatrics, I suddenly slapped my own forehead, gave Tam a tip-off in English, and began rummaging my pockets. When we left the house, I'd grabbed an old topcoat, not worn since that rainy night I met Noda, and in it somewhere was. She started explaining that Walton-san may have brought the pass with him, and merely let that fact slip his mind. Then I felt what I was looking for, in the bottom of the inside pocket. Noda's meishi, his business card, complete with the English note scribbled across the back. How stupid of me, I apologized. Had it all along. Noda-san's top priority pass. He gave it to me only yesterday. Yamada took the business card and studied it with a puzzled look. What did this have to do with anything? That's when I impatiently turned it over and pointed to the English scribbling on the back. Noda's initials, I groused, right there at the bottom. Hi Wakaramasu. He understood that Noda-sama surely had written this, but so what? It wasn't the official form that the rules specified. More musukashii. Noda-san was in a rush. I apologized again. Didn't have time to locate the regular form. Tam passed that along in better Japanese. Su desu. Yamada thoughtfully agreed that such oversights sometimes happened. Everybody knew the big daimyo had a tendency to override official channels. He shifted his yuzi uncertainly. Noda-sama insisted I finish this report by Monday, Tam stressed. We should only be a minute. Yamada scrutinized the back of the card a moment longer, holding it up to the light. What was he going to do? Finally, he handed it back, bowed reluctantly, and looked the other way. It was a go. God, that was close. Tam closed the door behind us and clicked on the lights. You don't know how lucky we were. If Morikawa had been on duty tonight, forget it. He'd never have bought that cock and bull routine. About a dozen computer workstations had been installed. On 12 to link up with the mainframe and data center on 11. As we moved quickly past the sleeping screens, blind eyes staring vacantly into space, there was an eerie, ghost-like abandonment to the place, all the more so because of its hectic motion during regular hours. The phantoms of regimented analysts seemed to haunt the rows of empty desks. Tam remarked she'd never seen it like this. The nerves sent her off duty. Only the storm of the decade, together with 2 a.m. Sunday morning, could create such solitude. It took God to shut down Dai Nippon. Okay, time to move fast. Let's hit Mori's lair. I was whispering as we neared the corner office. Ahead was the closed door, solid oak. I took a deep breath and reached for the knob. It was locked. No dice. I looked around at Tam, who was still wearing her lamb coat, gray against her dark hair, sleet melting on the shoulders. Let me try. She gave it a twist. Nothing. I don't suppose we'd be very smart just to kick it in, though that's what I feel like right now after all our trouble. She turned to me. Maybe there's a key somewhere in Noda's office. Think there's a chance. Could be. I was rummaging my pockets. First, though, let me check something. I pulled out a ring and began to flip through it. I ended up with a master, courtesy of the RM and S floor manager that day they turned in their keys. Now, if this internal door lock hasn't been changed yet, maybe. I selected one and kissed it for luck. Here goes. The key, a large silver model, was resistant, the way masters always are. Undeterred, I wiggled it forcefully, and slowly it slipped into the knob. A couple of jiggles more, and the thing began to revolve under my hand. We emitted matching sighs of relief as Tam shoved the door wide and reached for the light switch. Now I've got to regress into the past. A lot of their reports are in Japanese. She went on to explain that although she could read the kana syllabaries easily enough, she'd forgotten a lot of the kanji ideograms. She could piece together enough to work through a simple newspaper story, but heavy technical prose was always tough. She quickly sorted through the papers piled in neat stacks. Atop Mori's desk, but who knew what most of them said? Nothing looked like my stolen list. Next, she checked the drawers of the desk. One contained a heavily marked printout, the others, nothing. Time was ticking. If Yamada decided to make the rounds, no quantity of creative fiction would save us. She quickly grabbed the printout. At least we had one item that might give us something. What, though? We still weren't sure. Nothing resembled the page I'd lifted, but locating that document now appeared increasingly like a long shot anyhow. Guess everything seems easy till you actually try doing it. Where else to look? I glanced around the room, wondering about the file cabinet. Probably locked, and besides. That's when I saw it. On a side table next to some technical books was an item we'd both failed entirely to notice. A large leather attaché case. Tam, I think we've hit pay dirt. Check that out. Do you suppose she could have forgotten it last night when they shut the place down? Maybe she didn't need it. Anything's possible. I remember seeing her carrying it around yesterday afternoon. Well, could be this is our find. I lifted it and realized it was empty. Shit, I slammed it down and just then detected a faint rattle inside. Hold on a minute. I carefully shook it again and listened. Tam, there's something in here. I vote we take a peek. Which is what we did. No harm, right? I mean, the darned thing was just lying there. No break and entry. Guess what was inside? Not paper, not a meaty report, not lunch. Nothing, in fact, except for a shiny little compact disc, a CD. What the hell is this doing in here? Did she bring along some Beach Boys? Matt, that's an optical disc, a CD-ROM. She suddenly seemed very pleased. Compact disc, read-only memory. Except this one looks to be erasable and writable. This is the latest thing in computer storage technology. She held it up to the light, which reflected a rainbow of colors off its iridescent surface. Maybe we've found what we came for. Let's take it and go. Is this like the CDs in record stores? The ones you play back using some kind of laser gizmo? Same technology, only this is for text and data, not music. These can hold 500 megabytes, about 150,000 pages. Then I have some disquieting information to impart. I saw somebody come in here one day after shopping at Tower Records, and a CD he'd bought tripped the metal detector out there in Yamada's anteroom like he was wearing sleigh bells. Down inside this shiny plastic must be aluminum or something. We can't take it out. I turned it in my hand. And besides, what would we do with it anyway? Stick it in a Walkman and listen to all the little digits spin by. In hi-fi. I've got a reader at home, but wait, there's a better way. She lifted it from my grasp and headed out onto the floor. Ever hear of computer crime? In passing. Good, then what you're about to witness won't shock you. I watched as she kicked on one of the NEC desk stations and loaded in a program. Next, she walked over, flipped a switch on a little box, and a drawer glided out. In went Maury's shiny disk. Another button was pushed, the drawer receded, and the disk was spinning silently. Well, I thought, you want peaches, you shake the tree, right? Maybe she's about to kick hell out of the orchard. I'm going to dump this into the memory of the mothership downstairs. She did some fiddling, then typed in her password to sign on the mainframe on 11. Beam us down, Scotty. In moments, she and all those silicon cells below us were beeping away at each other. She didn't look up, just kept typing away, the hollow click-clack that's become the signature sound of our computer age. Finally, she leaned back and breathed. Okay. It's reading the disk. After it's in memory down there, we can pull up the contents here on the screen and see what we've got. I don't know how long it took to read the thing. Probably no more than a minute or so, though it seemed forever. Finally, something flashed on the screen and told us the disk had been dumped. Tam took it out of its little player and passed it to me. Here, put this back in her case, while I start pulling up the file. I just finished snapping it shut when I heard an expletive from out on the floor that would not be judged suitable for family audiences. Watch your language. She was sitting there staring at the screen. Finally, she turned and looked at me. So close, yet so far, it's encrypted. It's what? Come and look. I did. On the screen was a mass of numeric garbage. What was this all about? Matt, when this disk was written, whatever went on it was scrambled using some key, Probably the DES system, the data encryption standard. It keeps unauthorized intruders like us from snooping. How does anybody read it? A decrypting key must be in the hardware down on 11. But we can't get through to that level of the machine without an access code, which we don't have. Very smart, the electronic keys to the kingdom. I watched, wondering all the while what Yamada was doing out there. Should I blunder out and chat him up with my Berlitz Japanese, just to keep him occupied? The clock above the door was ticking away. Tam, why not just try activating the key using your own password as the access code? Maybe it'll get you into that level on the mainframe. She gave it a go without much enthusiasm. Predictably, the message came back, access code not recognized. Well, try some others, I was grasping. Hit it with Noda or Mori. She did, but after both were rejected, the workstation suddenly signed off. Click, out of the system. What's happened now? More bad news. I forgot the mainframe is programmed so that you get 3 tries at a protected code, and then it breaks the connection. That's to keep crackers like us from sitting here all day and running passwords at random. Another security precaution. 3 chances to guess the secret word, and then you're out. Sounds like a game show. I just stood there and scratched my head. Seemed we were, to be blunt, shit out of luck. What now, Professor? I assume there are about 100 million alphanumeric combinations they could use. Close. She was clicking away at the keyboard. So let's think a minute. She glanced back at me. Why don't we assume for a minute that this is a meaty disk? Safe bet. So the decryptor key in the machine here would be from meaty, right? Since Mori obviously brought the disk to be read. Sounds good. You know, I was in Ken's office once, and I recall watching some of his staff playing around with the information on one of these disks. Don't know why I still remember this, but the password they used was, I think MX something, 3 letters, followed by 6 digits. The digits were always changing, but the prefix was the same. So if your wild guess about this being a meaty disk is right, and the first 2 letters of the 3-letter alpha part are still MX, that means there are exactly, 26 letters in the alphabet times a million numbers, 26 million combinations. We're looking for one number in 26 million. So if it takes, say, 5 seconds to type one in and try it, we're talking roughly 130 million seconds to go the course. I glanced again at the door. Besides which, we get kicked off after every 3rd try. Working around the clock, we ought to have it sometime about, 2001. She glanced back at the screen, then suddenly whirled around, a funny look on her face. What do you have in your office? What do you mean? Don't you have a PC downtown? Just a little IBM at 512K. And also a Mac, a toy I use to draw cutsy-poo pictures now and then, and do covers for reports. How about a telephone modem? Built in, how else could I handle all that trading? And it's up. The IBM, never turn it off. Little twitch left over from playing the Hong Kong exchanges. Habits die hard. Okay, I'm going to try, and use it to crack the code in DNI mainframe. Honestly, for a second there, I thought my hearing had gone. My little IBM against that monster. How, for sake? There are 26 million. We'll have to do something not very nice. Since the Japanese aren't used to hackers, those bearded malcontents in firms who screw up business computers for spite, these workstations aren't buffered off sensitive parts of the system. We are now going to exploit that trust in Japanese culture. We're going to organize these terminals, hook them to your computer, and then direct that network against the mainframe downstairs, something no Japanese would ever dream of doing. She got up and went down the row clicking on machines. There's a list of names in my office, there by the phone. Can you bring it? Coming up, I fetched it. It was a temporary phone book of the staff on the floor. She took the list and went back down the line of stations, typing something on each keyboard. What are you doing, Tam? This is crazy. It'll just take a second. Everybody here has a password to sign on to the mainframe, but it's just the name of the person. She came back to the first workstation. Now the mainframe thinks 10 people just signed on to the system. We'll use these terminals to try access codes on the main computer. Your PC will control them so that each terminal hits it with 2 codes, and then the next one goes online. That way we'll never get kicked off. Should get around the 3 times, and you're out filter downstairs. She began frantically typing again. What are you doing now? We could try alphanumerics sequentially or randomly. I think randomly is probably better. It'll be faster. So I'm writing a little program for the mainframe, a random number generator. It'll start making up random access codes of MX, followed by a letter and 6 digits, and sending them to your PC downtown, which will immediately feed them back in pairs to these terminals. Out one door, in another. Maybe that will fool it. Christ, woman, you've got a criminal mind. Is this the kind of stuff you teach at NYU? What's your number downtown? She was typing away again. I wrote it down and handed it to her. I don't have the foggiest idea how you're going to be able to swing this. That's all right, I do. Just let me get your IBM networked into these terminals here. Fortunately, it's compatible, and all it's going to be doing for now is bouncing back numbers generated by the mainframe. She flipped some switches, then typed my number onto the screen. I momentarily wondered if the sleet had knocked out the phone system. It hadn't. Again, the seconds crawled by, but as soon as she'd finished her chat with my IBM downtown, the row of terminals suddenly started beeping away. 2 shots, beep. The next one came alive. 2 shots, beep, right down the row. Okay, your computer is running the show now. Sooner or later, maybe something will click. She punched a couple more keys, then got up. It's done. Ready to rock and roll. She was putting on her coat. We'll be running millions of numbers. Isn't anybody going to know you've pulled this? I was, I confess, totally dumbfounded. Not unless they discover my little program in the mainframe downstairs. But it's just a random number generator, something any sophomore could write. The trick is, we're hitting it with so many terminals it won't be programmed to keep track of all these little elves trying to sneak in. And when we're through, we'll turn them all off using your modem downtown. Good God, whatever happened to pen and pencil? I was still dazed. She'd done it all so fast. If you can find the decryptor key and get into the files, then what? You going to dump all the info on Maury's sexy little CD down at my place? I hope you've got lots of paper. Who knows what's on it? She was shutting off the lights. Come on, let's get out of here. Aye, Professor. I walked back, clicked off the light in Maury's office, then paused to double-check the lock. We came for printouts, remember? We only have Maury's. I was joining her. She glanced at the stack on her desk, then grabbed a pile and handed them to me. You'd better carry these, and don't be put off by my ugly American routine at the door. It'll be for a purpose. After she doused the rest of the overheads, we passed through the first security door and greeted Yamada. While I fiddled with Tam's printouts, she proceeded to give him a very Japanese-style dressing down, disguised as a series of pale compliments. She reviewed all her work for Dai Nippon, just happening to mention Noda-sama this and Noda-sama that every other breath. The hapless guy sucked in his breath and bowed a lot and high. So-ed about once a second, and then Sumame-san-ed some more. By the time the elevator appeared, she'd destroyed him. He'd lost so much face, he'd never dare mention our visit to Noda or anybody. About 2 minutes later, we were out on the sleet-covered sidewalk, looking for a cab. It was a heroic effort, but eventually we were headed back downtown. Secure and holding. Although my upstairs office was freezing, I was mesmerized watching the flashing green numbers spin on my little IBM screen. It was like playing one of those fruit machines at the local bars, except we were sitting there witnessing a gigantic intelligence turned against itself, searching for the crack in its own armor. There was something ironic about the fact that the Japanese were such a homogeneous, disciplined people. They didn't need vast arrays of American-style safeguards to keep crazies off their computers. Unfortunately for them, they weren't expecting a couple of American criminals with no such scruples. By 4 a.m., we had watched 3 million random numbers tried. By first light, we were up to 6. Tam, I'm beginning to get this sinking feeling meaty must have changed the prefix. I was bringing a new pot of coffee, half staggering up the carpeted stairs. Or maybe we should have done it sequentially. Maybe, but that would mean wasting a lot of time on numbers that are improbable. This is our best chance. She poured another cup of Java while I just stretched out on the floor. Damn, I wish I could remember what the other alpha was. MX what? That could save us days. We don't have days. I closed my eyes. Try hypnosis. She sat staring at the screen for a few moments, then slowly wheeled around. I know why I couldn't remember it. It was a repeat. Matt, it was X. Go with it. Hang on. She did some quick typing and hit the play button. Her face was showing the strain, but I loved her looks. What a champ. We were together, us against the beast. Unfortunately, though, the beast was still ahead. At 7:30, Ben roused himself and lumbered expectantly up the stairs. With a silent curse, I put on my boots and took him out for a stroll on the ice. He hated it. When we came back, I decided to give up and crash. Come on, this was insane. 1,000,000,000 to 1 shot, and we didn't even know what the prize was at the bottom of the box. We were getting nowhere. Meaty had changed the code and screwed us. Fortunately, however, I heroically vowed to try and stay awake till 8 a.m. That was it. The end. At exactly 7:49, the numbers abruptly stopped. Access code MXX 909,090 confirmed decryptor key activated. Confidential meaty memos started scrolling in orderly green clumps up the screen. My God, Matt, turn on your printer. Chapter 18. Jack doing anything today. Walton, what in hell? Jack O'Donnell and Joyce Hanson had been working through the 10-pound Christmas catalog. Known as the Sunday Times, she was up to arts and leisure. And he'd advanced as far as business when my call interrupted their mutually agreed-upon vow of silence. Now that her apartment in the West 70s had become Jack's weekend hideaway, his escape from phones and conferences, the number was as carefully guarded as a Minuteman launch code. The time was shortly after noon. He just braved a foot of snow and sleet to retrieve the paper and a couple of fresh croissants, while Joyce was still recovering from a 2 a.m. session, editing a speech one of his staffers had drafted for some Ilgwu holiday blowout the following week. Since he was still chewing over Noda's ominous phone call, wondering what to do, the last person on earth he wanted to hear from right now was Dai Nippon's lawyer, even if it was me. Feel like coming down for a Bloody Mary. An academic lady we both know is here, and we've happened across something you might find interesting. Very interesting. Care to elaborate? It's a little complicated, Jack. How about coming down? He glanced out the frosted kitchen windows, puzzling what in blazes was up, then finally agreed. Keep the coffee hot. You've got it. Joyce claimed to be unamused, though in truth maybe she wasn't all that heartbroken to have the place to herself for the afternoon. He grabbed his coat and said don't throw out the week in review. The streets were now at a standstill, so the prospect of finding, let alone traveling in, a taxi was implausible in the extreme. As a result, Senator Jack O'Donnell shared the Broadway local with several hundred of his lesser-heeled constituents, and finally managed to get down to Sheridan Square, from which it was only a few mushy blocks over to my place. Ben greeted him at the door with me not far behind, doubtless looking as if I'd just stumbled in from a 3-day forced march. Without a word, he passed over his coat, then followed me downstairs, where Tam was still going through the line of printouts spread across the dining room table, translating onto one of my yellow legal pads. I pointed him in the direction of the coffee urns stationed in the kitchen. He poured a cup, then came around and plopped down on the couch. Walton, he sampled his brew, then set it down. You're not going to believe what your goddamn client did Friday. Swear to God, your man actually threatened me, the bastard. A not too subtle warning to back off. Jack, that's small potatoes. I straddled one of the dining room chairs. What would you say to a possible play by our friend Matsuo Noda that makes Pearl Harbor look like a gesture of Japanese-American solidarity? 2 days ago, I might have thought you'd been smoking a controlled substance. Now, I'm not so sure. Well, we're still piecing it together. I don't think anybody could even imagine what's really afoot. One thing's for sure, though this is big. I paused. It might even be that Noda is somehow fronting for Meaty, though I'm still not totally convinced. I'd been turning that possibility over, but I somehow couldn't buy it all the way. Wasn't Matsuo Noda's style. He was a loner. Meaty, he looked at me. That's government, right? The ministry. International trade and industry. Japan's War Department for trade. Yeah, go on. Listen, all Nodas talk about helping American industry. Of course, it's bullshit. But I think it's just half the bullshit. What we suspect is, he's buying a little of everything so nobody will figure out their real agenda. You'd better back up and take this from the beginning. Wait a minute. Tam got up and started the turntable. Mendelssohn was still on the platter. Maybe we were taking too many precautions, but she still nursed the idea we might be bugged. With the music cranked up to 8, we proceeded to give Jack a quick summary of how the stack of memos on the table had come into our hands. In a way, though, they raised as many questions as they answered. Jack, nothing here is spelled out in detail. We have to take everything and sort of rotate it by 90 degrees to see how Noda fits in. I walked over to the table. Tam, where's your translation of that one by what's his name? Aikta. Right here, she handed it to me. Here, Jack, start with this, just to get up to speed on the background. He fumbled in his pocket, retrieved his bifocals, and began to read the yellow sheet. Operation, market share 90. Internal memo, number 22. From Hiramu Aikta, Deputy Minister of Industrial Technology Sector, Ministry of International Trade and Industry. Meaties. Subject, superchips. World dominance in semiconductors will provide the basis for Japan's control of the global information industry by the turn of the century, which will be the key to our economic leadership and military strength. The critical path to achieving this lies with the coming generations of semiconductor technology the submicron gigascale superchip. Accordingly, the objectives of operation market, share 90 in the semiconductor sector, should receive the highest possible priority. Areas of research should include semiconductor-grade polysilicon, silicon wafer production, ceramic packaging, quartz photomasks, X-ray lithography, supercooled Josephson junction circuits, and optoelectronic chips for optical switching. R&D should also be focused on digital signal processing, application-specific integrated circuits, ASICs, specialized dynamic random access memories, DRAMs, very large-scale integrations, VLSIs, for supercomputers. Walton, I can't make heads or tails of this gobbledygook. He tossed down the sheet. What's this all about? What it means, Tam spoke up, is that ICTA has targeted every emerging area of semiconductor research. Everything. A clean sweep. If he succeeds, sooner or later nobody else will even be able to make the really advanced chips. A few more years and America joins the third world. Jack looked a little skeptical. Truthfully, I found her extrapolations somewhat fanciful myself. But then, who knew? Tam, how about showing Jack that other memo? You know the one. She didn't say anything, just turned back and sorted through the stack of yellow pages till she had it. Out came Jack's glasses again. Operation Market Share 90. Internal Memo number 37. From Kenji Asano, Deputy Minister for Research and Planning, Ministry of International Trade and Industry. Meaty. Subject, current status of R&D. This office has now completed its review of the recent survey of research and development, R&D, by Japanese firms compiled by the Science and Technology Agency, the results of which are the subject of this memorandum. Of the companies surveyed, 70% maintain that their research is equal or superior to that of leading firms in the U.S. and Europe, although only 18.2% consider themselves in unchallenged top position. Furthermore, the remaining 30% believe their research is inferior or lagging behind the West, ref. To Table 1. Of those who reported inadequate R&D in high technology areas, the following reasons were given. Whoever wrote this is just poor-mouthing. He flipped on through the sheets, then looked up. Saying he needs more money for basic research. I hear this kind of stuff all the time. Hell, Japan already spends nearly twice what we do per capita on non-military R&D. What does he want? Keep reading, Jack, and you'll see that the main R&D he's pushing is in computers and semiconductors. It ties in exactly with ICTA's targets. This is backup consensus for the big drive. You still haven't told me anything I didn't already suspect. He tossed the pages onto a side table. So how about answering a few less obvious questions? Shoot. First off, what's this Operation Market Share 90 all about? He took off his glasses and pocketed them. Jack, remember the famous Hitachi directive that got loose a while back? The one on how to market their 256K memory chips, ordering their salesmen just to keep underpricing American manufacturers till they had the sale. Lost no object. According to Henderson, by the time the International Trade Commission got around to convicting them of dumping, they demolished America's domestic industry and nailed down 90% of the market. 90, you say? Well, that's getting to be a familiar number. He slumped back against the sofa. Out of curiosity, what's included in this meaty Market Share 90 operation? Computers, of course, but also pretty much everything in high tech, where the U.S. still has a leading position from biotech to aerospace. These guys don't think small. I gave Ben a pat, then pulled Maury's printout around, going on to explain that we'd come across it in the drawer of her desk. It was, I added, Obviously some kind of special computer sorting of the firm's DNI was targeting. The categories in the sort were a breakdown of high-tech areas, with individual firms listed underneath, together with a summary of their research expenditures. Take a look. First, notice that this printout has been sorted and converted into this list here. I placed it alongside the page I'd found in the Xerox machine. Voila, they're identical. So, okay, now compare that list with the R&D areas targeted in Ikta's memo. I laid Tarn's translation down next to Maury's pages. See, everything on Ikta's meaty wish list for research in semiconductors is now being done by the American outfits named here in Maury's sorting, which is the latest revision in DNI acquisition program. What are you getting at? He looked it over. It's a pattern, Tam spoke up. These new buy-ups cover Japan's last remaining shortfalls in R&D. I spotted it right away. But what I didn't realize till we got these memos was that the areas covered by Maury's companies exactly dovetail with Meady's goals. I probably wouldn't have noticed it without her sorting. Mixed in with all the other companies Noda's buying, he's targeted those that fill the gaps in MLTI semiconductor push. Jack looked at us quizzically. Are you telling me Meady's behind Noda's program? That's where Tam and I parted company. She argued it was obviously a Meady play. Why start from scratch when you can just buy what you need? Sound business investment. For some reason, though, I wasn't so sure. Somehow that explanation seemed too simplistic. Unfortunately, however, there's a law in science or somewhere that says you should always pick the least complicated theory that fits all your data. Hers appeared on the face of it to address the facts perfectly. Except for one unknown. If Maury did accidentally feed me the sorting that blew the whistle on Noda's design, why? I think this has to be what the buying program on this list is all about, Tam answered. He's taking over firms whose R&D coincides with Meady's targets. Matsuo Noda has been put to work simply acquiring what they need, but to make sure nobody suspects the real agenda. He's worked up this elaborate management assistant story, buying all kinds of companies. Her voice was bitter. The next step will be to set up joint ventures between these firms he's bought and their counterparts in Japan. Then all American R&D would be shared. Which means Jack's face began to redden, that since we always seem to lose out when it comes to commercializing what we invent, the U.S. ends up becoming one big think tank for Japan in the 21st century. We do the research, and they manufacture and market. They pick our brains, and then cash in on it. He turned back to Tam. Do you really think it was Noda who planned all this? I wish I knew what to think. Her voice grew hesitant as she continued to stare down at the memo. It's hard to believe Ken would do something so unethical, especially a grab like this, when I'm sure he's convinced Japan ought to be advancing its own R&D. Ken whose? Did you see who authored that second memo? She pointed to the name. Kenji Asano is apparently a close friend of Dr. Richardson's. I broke in, my tone unnecessarily sharp. Unfortunately, he seems to be an even closer friend of his cronies at Meady. Tam didn't respond, just sat there looking betrayed. Matt, let's be constructive here. Jack walked over and shook the coffee pot, then sloshed the last dregs into his cup. We damn well ought to take some kind of action. That's why we wanted to talk to you. Tam came back to life. Do you think you could leak something about this? Maybe to the Times. And say what? He laughed, a little sadly. That I've happened across a set of secret Meady memos that bear a coincidental similarity to some stolen DNI printout. Don't think that's exactly fit to print. He frowned. But I'm glad our Mr. Noda has finally let slip his true intentions. I never believed all that pious malarkey about propping up American industry. He snorted. The man gets a few suckers like you to help him destabilize our bond markets, in the process of which he turns the high-tech sector of American industry into a bargain basement for meaty. Tam sipped her coffee, maybe trying to act as if Jack's comment hadn't stung her the way I suspected it did. I decided to try and handle her defense. Jack, hold on a second. You've got to admit that a lot of these outfits Dai Nippon is buying are currently on pretty thin ice. If somebody doesn't come in here and help run them right, they're probably headed offshore anyway. We're not talking about first aid now, Walton. We're talking about Matsuo Noda taking over the most strategic segment of our economy after pulling the biggest scam in the history of world finance. That looks to be the story. I watched his cheeks redden with frustration. So what do you propose we do? There's no law against foreign investment. Securities exist to be bought. Well, damn it, Matt. We've both seen enough by now to realize this Noda genius is up to no good. We've got to stop him. Couldn't agree more. So why don't you just arrange to have the SEC shut down trading in every stock DNI has in its gun sights? You know that's out of the question. Exactly. So what legal remedies are there? How do you squelch a takeover program that's not even against the law? That's your specialty, counselor, or so I hear. Jack, be realistic. We can expose this thing, maybe even try and lean on Tokyo to back off. But aside from shutting down trading, there's no legal way to actually stop Matsuo Noda from buying whatever he likes. You can't shut Japanese investors out of Wall Street. There'd be a riot downtown. We're talking about the open market here, not some inside deal. Forget legalities. He scowled. Tell me how your damned corporate raiders go about shenanigans that don't quite match the letter of the law. Jack, I've officially quit the business. Retired. Guess you hadn't heard. That's what you think. You just got unretired. As of this moment. Now give me one of those high-priced consultations you're so famous for. For you, Jack, I looked him over. One last play. Trouble is, there's not much that's doable, at least on short notice. You say not much, which means there's something. Well, one possibility might be to try and slow him down. Some make him think twice, say, by punching up the prices of the stocks he's aiming at. Make them less of a bargain. That's a start. Not much of one. Well, how could it be done? Since you're such a Boy Scout, Jack, you probably won't like what I have in mind. This one's not exactly in the rule book. Try me. Okay, it's a long shot, and we'll definitely need some help. If we're going to tinker with the market, then we have to have somebody Wall Street trusts. And also somebody who's got a lot of money to play with short term. Sounds like our mutual friend from Georgia. Well, Henderson can play the street like a symphony. What I'm thinking of involves tricking the smartest guys around, the risk arbs. We'd need to suck them in. If anybody can do it, he's the man. Then I say let's give him a buzz. Fine, why don't I get him on the squawk box so we can all listen in? There beside the couch was an old conference phone some client once gave me as a Hanukkah gift. At long last, it might be good for something. The risk arbs, by the way, are the risk arbitrageurs, those speculators who live with one ear to the ground. The minute they hear word, inside or otherwise, that a company is in play, meaning it's a candidate for a possible takeover or merger, they immediately grab up and stockpile huge blocks of its publicly traded shares. Then they sit back and pray for bidding war. Since Company has offered so much a share for Company Z, maybe Company B will step in and offer more. Or maybe Company Z itself will outbid them both and offer even more in a stock buyback. They're the hyenas of the hunt, getting plenty of leftovers no matter who ends up buying Z. Besides, they don't really care anyway. They're not investing in American industry. They're laying side bets. Tam and Jack settled back while I punched in Bill's number. The doctor was in, and after a few profane formalities tempered when we informed him of a female presence, he listened with uncharacteristic attentiveness. I gave him an update, concluding with the view that we ought to try heading off Meady's presumed play. Henderson, despite his admiration for Noda's style, didn't take kindly to the possible buy-up of America's remaining R&D in semiconductors, a specter that coincided all too closely to his own fable about how Meady had already eaten one segment, memory chips. I decided to start by seeing if he and I were on the same wavelength concerning countermeasures. Without tipping him to my own idea, I asked what he thought could be done. Tell you it won't be easy. One thing, though, we could maybe try and scare him off with a little brush fire. Try that in English, Bill, Jack interrupted. Don't know, maybe a few hot rumors could hit the street. Mergers, takeovers, your usual quick-buck action. Say a few of the CEO of these outfits on Noda's Christmas list had a little powwow, a secret meeting everybody manages to hear about, and supposedly talked about getting themselves bought out. Naturally, they'd deny everything on the evening news, which in itself will tell the street we're talking wedding bells. Is that really going to do us any good? Tam was talking to the box. Afternoon, ma'am. Like that last book of yours a whole lot. Hope you're keeping them boys sober. I could almost see Henderson turn up the charm, sculpting a voluptuous, horny divorcee in his ardent imagination. Tam, to my surprise, was not totally immune to his Georgia sweet talk. She sort of smiled to herself as he continued, but to answer your question, a takeover rumor can do marvels for your stock price. What happens is the ARBs come in, snapping up blocks of stock and holding them, just in case. It can take a lot of securities out of circulation, at least short term. So if we could get the ARBs to chasing those companies on Noda's list, they'd give the Japs a little competition. At the very least it'd kite the market, hurt their pocketbook. Bill, that's why we wanted to call you. How about putting your finances where your flag waving is? Be an ARB yourself for a few weeks. Lead the herd. Start picking up some blocks of stock and shooting off your mouth a lot about your inside information. I'll even kick in my modest retirement fund to help the action. What if somebody pulls the rug out from under us? Shoots the whole thing down. We'd be left holding all that stock we'd bid up. We could lose our shirt. Then protect the downside by buying puts. I have full faith you'll think of something. Come on, Henderson, be a market maker. You've got the credibility. All you have to do is set a spark to this. Then we'll quietly head for the sidelines to make way for all those investment house yuppies who love to shoot craps with their clients' money. Have to be a quick in and out for damn sure. This hot air balloon won't stay up for long. He paused, clearly not wild about the idea. Tell you what, though, maybe if we had a real good story. Ideas? Well, how about this? Maybe we've just heard on the grapevine that those outfits on Noda's playlist have started a little white knight talking. And since this is just speculation, we might as well think big. Know who I mean. The pride of Armonk. Give that man a gold star. We both know IBM headquarters ain't talked to nobody, but God, since Watson outgrew his short pants. So it'd be weeks before they'd stomp on some horsebucky rumor about how they were looking into saving whatever's left of the chip business here. Just covering their ass, we'll say. Friendly mergers. No poison pill stuff. That's exactly the kind of specious supporting detail that always triggers the street's greed. I concurred. Offhand, I'd say that sounds just about perfect for tomorrow's hot tip on the exchange floor. In truth, it did seem like a workable first draft of an idea. No law against deep background sources that turn out to be 24-karat bullshit down the road. The antitrust implications would be front page for a couple of days. But since the administration adhered to the see no evil school of regulation, that angle wouldn't impress the smart money. America starts thinking big, chucks the myth of garage entrepreneurs, and staves off Japan using a dose of Meaty's own medicine. IBM rides in to rescue what's left of Silicon Valley. It might just make Matsuo Noda back away. He'd learn America could play hardball too. We told Bill to take the rest of the day off. Jack was, I can report, noticeably encouraged. Tam also. For my own part, I just crashed, with a few wistful reflections on my Rocky. Non-seduction. But if we pulled off our little scam, she might be more inclined to take me seriously. As Shakespeare said, Lord, what fools these mortals be. I realized the true extent of Matsuo Noda's reach on Monday, just after noon. I was still home when Tam called from the office uptown to inform me of the latest developments. I was so busy on the phone just then, planting merger rumors with a few friendly columnists, that I was almost annoyed to take time out for her call. However, she quickly captured my attention. First, the revisions on DNI acquisition program were in full swing. Noda had started purchasing those healthy semiconductor outfits on the new list. Then she went on to say that an additional set of buy orders had just gone out over the wire. Noda had been on his satellite hookup to Tokyo all morning, and he'd now finalized official authorization for a minor expansion, so to speak, in DNI program. Apparently, Tokyo had agreed with him that his portfolio should include a certain high-grade issue to achieve better overall balance. She didn't say much more for obvious reasons, but we both had a strong hunch what must have happened. If anything was bugged, for Chris' sake, it wasn't my apartment. That's B-movie stuff. It had to be my phone. Matsuo Noda had just kicked off a new buy program to the tune of $3.5 billion. For what? More high-tech stragglers. Not precisely. One company, and in an amount intended to stay safely just below the Securities and Exchange Commission's Form 13D mandatory reporting. 25 million shares of IBM, roughly a full 4% of Big Blue. It was a massive variation of the Pac-Man takeover defense. You eat anybody you think wants to eat you. Noda's message to us was loud and clear. He could buy the USA anytime he wanted. Dai Nippon was unstoppable.